Hello. The Evolutionary Zipper. This is the second time I'm recording this shit, so I'm gonna remember what I said last time. So, right, I find, you guys know that I'm politically, economically very, very left-wing. One might say a socialist. And occasionally, I run into an argument with somebody with a social Darwinist orientation who makes the claim that social Darwinism is the only just ethical system because of evolution. Because evolution is a competitive, aggressive, competitive system. And I have a problem with this claim. Because on the one hand, I get excited because I would argue that I am prescriptively an evolutionist. And I get excited, like, yes, evolution is the basis for morality. Evolution is the basis for ethics. But at the same time, I'm like, whoa, that's not how it works. That's not how evolution actually works. And I realize because they've completely misconstrued it. What you have to understand is when people talk about how evolution is the survival of the fittest and the selfish gene and all that, that is us anthropomorphizing evolution. Evolution itself is a neutral process. It's just random genetic variations that have a certain effect. Saying that it's competition and that it's like this law of the jungle type thing, that is us adding a metaphor. That is a very human metaphor that's characterizing this process as sort of heartless, cold, and, evil. That is us adding, our own sort of emotional description to it. That is not the way the system actually is. And I always have a problem with this because evolution does seem to have competition, but it also seems to have plenty of cooperation. Like, the cells in our bodies are not really competing. Now, of course, you could say that they are competing because some cells die and some cells get to live, but, it's a very different kind of competition. The allegory of the law of the jungle doesn't exactly apply to the environment within a human body. Nor does it apply to, a bacterial colony, nor does it apply to some sort of ecosystem where there's cooperation on multiple layers. So, what it seems to suggest for me is that whenever we talk about it as being a competitive or a system, we're anthropomorphizing it. And when we talk about it as being a cooperative system, we're anthropomorphizing it. Whether or not it's subjectively cooperative or competitive is sort of hard to actually determine. What's actually true is it seems like there is an element of cooperation on every layer. And what's also true is that evolution is, of course, a multi-layer process. It's something that happens on the layer of physics and particles, and then organelles and DNA, and then organisms and cells, and then, communities and societies, and even higher up, the highest of all possible layers on the level of theories and philosophies and art. And of course there's competition and cooperation on every layer. Now, what's interesting is that the organisms that are competitive at the highest layer, which is us, because we're the only ones that are competitive at this highest layer, are cooperative on all the lower layers. Our society is more cooperative, our bodies are internally cooperative, and the particles within our bodies are effectively cooperative, right? So on a cellular, biological, sociological level, we are all cooperative. Organisms that are not competitive at the higher level are not competitive at the higher level, are competitive at a lower layer, are not cooperative at a lower layer. But they may be cooperative on a layer below that. So, for example, a bacterial colony, a bacterial colony doesn't have sort of a society or a sociology, but it is cooperative sort of on a level of organelles, on a level of cells. So, what this makes me think is that evolution sort of works as like a zipper. What it does is in order to achieve competition at the highest of all possible layers, it must achieve cooperation at the lower layers. So in order to construct an organism that wants to compete at the higher layer, evolution first has to make sure that this organism is cooperative at a level of physics, cooperative at a layer of organelles and cells, and cooperative at a sociological level. right? Which is what you get with humans, right? Not completely, because obviously there's still competition at a social level, and there's still competition at sort of a biological level. But the point is that the further up we go, the more cooperative all the lower layers get. So it's like it's zipping us up. That's the metaphor that applies quite well here, I think. And this is where the social Darwinist is completely full of shit, is because they're not actually interested in competition at the highest of all possible layers. Most likely because they don't actually see the existence of such a layer. And the social Darwinist, and it's usually, today it would be tied with free market capitalism, is of course that the market is of course maintains competition, possible competition at all possible layers. But that doesn't make any sense for obvious reasons. Well, not really obvious reasons, but it doesn't, obviously there's no competition at the highest of all possible layers because there's competition at a lower layer. You know, our theories and our art are not competitive because you don't have a society where everybody is creating art. You have a society where people are fighting over resources and trying to just get by. That's what the free market actually maintains. So how can you have competition at the highest of all possible layers if people are competing at a lower layer? It doesn't make any sense. What you need to understand about this is when you look at evolution as sort of you have the environment of the organism and the organism that's evolving. So you have like the organism and its subjective experience. That is the thing that's evolving. And everything outside of the organism, including other organisms around it and the environment, that is its environment. That is the stuff that's external to the organism. Well, the organism is perhaps competing with other organisms, but the environment can be thought of as a cooperative entity here, right? Because it's like the environment, I'd like to use the metaphor of it's like a scientist with a lab coat who's prodding this organism and stimulating it in various ways to try and get it to adapt, right? Because what the scientist is interested in is he's interested in constructing the best of all possible organisms. That's what you can think of evolution as. It's like a scientist who's trying to answer the question, how do we build the best possible organism? And it's a pretty dire and unfortunate system where it has to involve suffering, and it has to involve failure, and it has to involve mistakes. But once the mistakes have been made, then we've constructed the perfect organism, and we can move on to more challenges, right? And those challenges necessarily entail competition at a higher layer. So it's like we've zipped up that layer because we figured out what's actually good on that lower layer, and we've moved on to a higher layer where there's new challenges and new mistakes to be made. That's what you can think of as this as, you know, with the evolution of the human being, is that we've solved the problems that happen at the layer of chemicals and organic chemicals. We've solved the problems that happen at the layer of cells. We've solved the problems that happen at the layer of the organism. We've solved the problems, well, we haven't completely solved them yet, that happen at the layer of society and biosphere and ecosystem. We haven't completely solved them, but we're getting there. And then you have competition at the highest of all possible layers, the layer of theory and art. And this always comes back to art with me, theoretical artist, right? No, but the reason I always come back to art is because I feel art is the one thing that's never going to go away. You know, no matter how advanced we get, it's not going to disappear. You know, it doesn't matter if it's 1 billion trillion years from now. Assuming consciousness exists, art will continue to exist. That's the one thing that's always being made and going to continue to be made. Even in the mega-consciousness Borgian example I had in the last video, you're going to still get art. So that's why, you know, it feels like the entire purpose is to have this competition of art, of artistic works and theories at the highest of all possible layer. In order to achieve that, you must ensure to have maximum competition up here, you must have minimum competition down here. Right? That's obvious, right? That's just, it makes perfect sense. You can't have competition up here if there's all sorts of competition down here. It just doesn't work. It's not effective, right? You're less competitive on the top layer if you're competitive on a lower layer, right? That's why you have to zip this layer up, figure out what works, zip it up, and then have competition up here. And then ironically, figuring out what works is actually figuring out how to cooperate, so that you can have competition at a higher layer. It makes me think that the purpose of evolution is to maximize competition at the highest of all possible layers, which is the layer of ideas, the layer of art. it also makes me think that this falls in line completely with the idea that evolution is a process that tries to maximize complexity. The only argument to be made against this really is that evolution doesn't have a purpose, that evolution is just a process of random variations that has random results, in which case it does make sense to be a prescriptive anti-evolutionist in that case, because you don't actually know, what evolution's doing. It could be doing anything, right? But, yeah, I mean, you have to understand, though, like, when you're talking about the evolution of human beings and the evolution of mimetics and the evolution of human ideas are not owned by people. Human ideas are like abstract organisms that exist outside of humans themselves. Like mathematical concepts are abstract ideas that exist external to the individuals who learn about them. They are discovered, not merely created. It's the same thing with art. It's the same thing with theory. You can't think of it as something that is owned by the individual. That's why the whole idea of, like, private property and ownership is such an archaic, primitive idea, not a prudent evolutionary one. A prudent evolutionary idea is the realization that, I lost my train of thought. The point is, the point is, we don't own our ideas, is the point. Our ideas, and since we don't own our ideas, and we're talking about the evolution of ideas themselves, we are no longer the organism that's evolving in such a case, in a process of evolution that's happening at the top layer, right? We are not what's evolving up here. What's evolving at the top layer are the theories themselves and the art itself. We are no longer evolving. We are one of two things. We're either the constituent, the intermediaries, the cooperative agents that allow for that competition to take place, or we are part of the environment itself that creates sort of the context for that evolution, that molds that evolution and allows for it to happen. One way or the other. It depends what you think of as the environment. I know this all goes into, like, very sort of weak, vague definition, but yeah, it's like we're either the cells of the organism, where the organism is the theory, the set of abstract ideas. That's the organism. We are its cells, so to speak. Or we are its environment. Society, actually no, we are its cells, but its society as a whole is that organism's environment. But the point is, what you need to understand is that we are no longer the thing that is evolving. At the top layer, we are not what's evolving. And since we're not what's evolving, social Darwinist ideas fly right out the window. Because all of a sudden you have a very sort of necessity to have a high level of cooperation at our layer, because we are not the thing that's actually evolving. And our mission is not to actually evolve anymore. Our evolution has finished. We have been perfected. We work perfectly. The only thing that needs to happen is the evolution of our ideas. Well, okay, we're not perfect, but the idea is that it's like, again, it's a zipper. It doesn't, it doesn't work as, like, as soon as you can compete up here, you're no longer competitive down here. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the more competitive a species gets at a higher layer, the less competitive it is at a lower layer. The more competitive a system is. So, once you understand that when the organism, the evolutionee, is the set of abstract ideas, the theory, the art, the human is no longer the organism that is evolving. It is no longer the evolutionee, it's the evolutioner, so to speak. It's the scientist with the lab coat trying to probe and figure out what the correct set of ideas is, or it's the you could think of it as it's the cell, it's the organelle, it's the constituent part that allows for that is part of this greater organism that is evolving. Once you understand that, then you have to open up the door for all sorts of systems of ethics that involve high levels of cooperation and high levels of collectivism, because it's obvious that that to have maximum competition up here, you need maximum cooperation down here, which means maximum collectivism. I mean, that's what you'd want to ideally maximize competition at the highest of all possible layers. is you'd want maximum collectivism. You'd want a system where people are working in concert with one another at all times in order to allow for the competition of organisms that exist outside of us. Once you understand that, then this whole free market shtick falls apart quite easily. And the point is, you can't. You have a great argument against the social Darwinist who would like to use evolution as the basis of ethics, but doesn't understand how evolution works. See, the problem with them is that they're short-minded. They think evolution ends at the individual. Right? And understand that there is something that is greater than the individual. This all boils down to the whole idea that we partition reality into categories of this is nature, this is artificial shit that human beings make, and this is God. Well, we've stripped that one away. We no longer have that part of the partition, but we still have these two groups. And they don't make any sense. This group, nature, encompasses everything, which means it must encompass everything human beings do, which means that whole, Hayek's idea of, designed order versus natural order doesn't make a lick of fucking sense. When does something stop being designed order and become natural order, right? Or vice versa. It's very hard to explain something like that because it's if it's impossible for evolution to be a system that does both, that somehow just makes huge mistakes but also gets something right, I worded that badly. What I mean to say is it's the idea of the state within Hayek's philosophy is that the state is just a mistake. It's designed order, and it's like people trying to tame evolution. Well, I don't think that that's possible. It's not possible for us to tame evolution, right? And I don't mean to say that that's it's impossible and any attempt at trying to tame evolution will fail. I mean that the very idea of trying to attempt to tame evolution is impossible. It's impossible to even attempt to tame it, right? What I mean is that even an attempt at taming evolution is itself part of evolution. You can't ever get outside of the process, right? You can't ever take this sort of omniscient perspective and try to tame the process, right? Any attempt at taming is still just part of the process, which means that the existence of the state and the government is itself an emergent property that has a very prudent evolutionary purpose. And it quite naturally fits into the whole zipper metaphor because what the state's purpose is to zip us up so that we can compete at a higher layer. That's what it's actually trying to do. Because it's trying to make it so that we're not competing for resources anymore. It's making it so that we compete for ideas. It's making it so that we don't compete anymore. We start to cooperate, and the things that are competing are the ideas that we are part of. The abstract thoughts and movements and art that we create. No longer us. That's why the whole Mises Hayek kind of world is just nonsense, because it draws this huge distinction. It's the free market is natural order and the government is designed order. It doesn't make any sense. Because for one, again, the market is as constructed as the government is, for one. And for two, it's if the government is just a huge blunder, then how do you know that the market isn't either? I mean, that's pretty hard. Given how pervasive the government is, it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain such a huge blunder given how pervasive it is. So one might think that if evolution can make huge mistakes like that, it's probably evidence of the fact that all evolution does is make random creations and mistakes. So there's no reason to think right off the bat that the government is something that is just a mistake and the market is something that's pure natural. And the reason that they're different is because the government is constructed and the market's not. That's not how it works. They're both equally constructed. The difference, and they both have an evolutionary purpose, right? But the only difference is in what their functions are, not really how they're designed. I think Hayek was making a huge mistake when he talked about designed order versus natural order. I think they both have an evolutionary purpose, right? The point is, I'm like very excitedly, prescriptively an evolutionist because I think that evolution, what you can think of it as, is a process that tries to maximize competition at the highest of all possible layers. And if that's what it's trying to do, the emergence of something like government makes perfect sense. And the emergence of something like government to try and tame something like a market also makes perfect sense. Now, I'm not saying that the market has no evolutionary purpose. It had a purpose back before, it succeeded feudalism, but eventually another system will come along and must succeed the market and must succeed capitalism because the market is not the end. The market is simply an intermediary step. It's competition at a lower layer because what we had competition on an even lower layer, and then the market came in and it made cooperation at a layer of like interpersonal relationship and higher competition at a layer of resources. Now we come in and we wrap that whole thing up and make cooperation at a layer of resources and competition at a layer of ideas. That is how this process actually works. That is why there is a state, and that is what this sort of effective natural order is coming to. So the idea that's like state is this designed order, that this alien parasite that comes in from outside, is that you're just not understanding what evolution is trying to do here, right? This is the next step. This is, the path forward, evolutionarily speaking. I'm trying to think if that made sense. This is probably makes more sense than my last recording of this damn thing. But yeah, the point is just like the distinction between designed order and natural order is just a silly one, because again, biologically speaking, everything is natural order. Everything must be part of the natural order, which means there's a huge fallacy here in terms of saying that there is no such thing as designed order. Designed order is itself natural order. And what is its purpose in terms of natural order? Its purpose can only be to maximize competition at a highest of all possible layer. The point is, if ethically speaking you're an evolutionist and you think that you should be a prescriptive evolutionist and evolution is the basis for ethics, then this should be your interpretation of things. At least you should explore these options, right? Because clearly there's a layer above, competition between individuals. Clearly there's an even higher layer, and the only way that competition on that higher layer can happen is if there's cooperation on the lower layer. And the only way to achieve that is for us to realize this and to start just cooperating. And part of these like social movements and Marxist ideas and these attempts at creating equality is precisely that. It is evolution. Is it us figuring out we want to cooperate at this layer, we want to compete at a higher layer. That's everything that's happening with these political changes that have taken place in the past centuries. So yeah, and with that in mind, like the whole laissez-faire capitalism thing just becomes a regressive evolutionary idea because it's actually trying to prevent competition at the highest of all possible layers. Yeah, hopefully that made sense. The point is, I didn't think that for people on the left wing, don't be so like anti-evolutionist. Don't be so afraid of being a prescriptive evolutionist. I think it's very important to have this discussion and to try and figure out a way to rectify evolution, prescriptive evolution, with socialist left-wing ideas, and to try to figure out a way that they coincide. And I think that they actually do coincide beautifully if you interpret evolution as a process that tries to maximize competition at the highest of all possible layers. That is what it's doing. At the highest possible layer, which, as we know, the only thing I can imagine the highest possible layer to be at this point in time is the layer of ideas and theories and art. And I can't imagine anything being higher than that. But right now, that's because maybe that's a limitation. Maybe there is something higher than that. But, yeah, right now, I believe that to be the highest of all possible layers. And this ties into complexity maximizing as well. The point is, just really think about this, because I think it's in our interest as a movement to try and rectify evolution with ethics, so that we have a more solid basis for this ethics, and that people can't come in and start using the fact that you're anti-evolution as an argument against this philosophy. You're just anti-evolution. You're just wrong. You're anti-evolution. Ironically, I think it's the other way around. I think that the social Darwinists are the ones that are anti-evolution. Right? Empathy is not a mistake that evolution made. It's not designed order. Hayek, you fool. It's actually a thing that's there for a reason, because it's an attempt at it's evolution's attempt at getting us to cooperate as much as possible. Because what it's interested in is having competition at a higher layer than us. Yeah. So ironically, I think they're the ones who are actually working against evolution here, and we're the ones who are working for it whilst acting like we're not. It's a weird sort of state of affairs, but yeah, I really think that this further consideration is needed, and honestly, there's probably a much more elegant way to say it. But the thing is, I know for a fact that I'm right about this. Like, intuitively, this makes perfect fucking sense. Like, I can't imagine being wrong. This would have, like, I know that I'm right, I don't know enough about evolutionary science and the terminology myself to explain everything elegantly here, and explain it nicely. So I'm maybe making it hard to understand, but it makes so much sense. Trust me when I say it makes so much sense. At the very least, be open to the idea of being prescriptively an evolutionist. Prescriptively pro-evolutionist. Anyway, cheers.